Okay, ladies and gentlemen, warmly welcome to our first FlorenceLive interviews, and a special warm welcome to my namesake, Alexander Schallenberg, all the way from Vienna, Austria. It's wonderful to have you here. Sorry for the couple technical mishaps before we got going. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first in our set of interviews. You will have seen some of the webinars that we've had previously dealing with issues such as state and market, digitalization, and the future of democracy. And we're very much continuing on the theme of a post-COVID-19 world. And today's guest is, I must say, an old friend. So bear with me. Alexander Schallenberg is not only a son of a diplomat, but a diplomat himself, and we actually crossed paths in Brussels in the 1990s. Yes, we look much younger than what we actually are. We are, by definition, institutional nerds, because together as antiches or deputy antiches or spokesmen, we used to deal with arcane issues such as the Amsterdam negotiations and the Nice negotiations and the Austrian presidency and the Finnish presidency and the rest of it. Alexander has studied law in Vienna, in Paris, and also at the College of Europe in Bruges. And he's been working for the Ministry for Foreign Affairs ever actually since 1997. And I remember crossing paths when I was foreign minister, and he was actually the spokesman of both Ursula Plasnik and Michael Spindelegger in Vienna. And he became a foreign minister, the foreign minister of Austria last year. So warmly welcome, Alexander. It's lovely to have you here.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for the introduction. And we do look a lot younger than we did at those days in Brussels. Probably was the heydays of European integration at the time. But it's good to see you, and thanks for the invitation.
Lovely to have you here. So we're going to have a casual 30, 35, 40-minute conversation, and we also encourage our audience to post some questions. I'll try to filter them along as the interview goes on. Let me begin just with a generic question, Alexander, about the COVID situation in Austria. We've been in this for about 3 months right now. Where are you sitting in terms of controlling the pandemic at the moment?
Well, actually, the situation is, as far as pandemics go, pretty good. I mean, we have been among the first to implement a full lockdown beginning of March. I have always to say, and I always underline, that the thing is, our advantage was that we were direct neighbors of Italy. So the pictures coming out of Bergamo hit immediately here a chord, and we saw what was going on. And so it didn't need a lot of convincing of the public that something has to be done and it has to be drastic. And now, luckily, since mid-April, we are again in the phase of easing step by step, every second week, the restrictions, the restrictive measures. And just today, this morning, I gave a press conference together with the Minister of Health, announcing that we are opening borders to, last week we opened borders to 7 neighboring countries. And today we announced opening borders next week, Tuesday next week, to 31 countries, meaning European Union and EFTA countries, including Monaco, San Marino, Andorra. 4 important exceptions. One of your favorite neighbors, Sweden. Alex is smiling. Got you. UK, Spain, and Portugal. But I hope that we will be able to open also to these countries in the course of July. So this is an ongoing process. The next big step for us, obviously, and now I'm talking as foreign minister, obviously, is third countries, opening travel to third countries. This is a tricky issue. The Commission, we expect the Commission to put forward guidelines this Friday, and I would hope that we manage, at least in this phase, some kind of European cooperation on the question how to deal with third countries. What about transcontinental flights and so on? Because if one of us opens due to Schengen, then it is as good as everybody opens. I mean, if you can fly in through Paris or Frankfurt, then why bother having, specific rules in other countries? So I believe that this is a phase where we need a certain amount of European cooperation. But for the time being, I have to say, interestingly enough, we always expected that these measures of easing our restrictions will have an effect on the COVID numbers in Austria. And for the time being, they didn't. We are stable since the beginning of April, stable, the reproduction rate below 1%. It's 1.8, 1.6, it depends on the week. And cases are extremely low. So there are even experts who say that we don't know whether there will be a second wave, but the risk is obviously present. But all the measures we have adopted in getting back to a new normal, as we call it, have not shown any effect on the COVID-19 statistics, luckily.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to hear that. And you know, having been in a couple of crises over the years myself, you always sort of try to figure out, did I do it the right way? Did we do the right decisions? And what's going on? And this was very much an unknown. I mean, you've gone through a lot of various crises in various positions, you know, 9/11, the financial crisis, the Euro crisis, the migration crisis, and then this one. Now, you mentioned the word new normal. May I ask you, as a diplomat and as a foreign minister, I mean, how has this all affected the way in which you work at the ministry, and of course, and also with your foreign minister colleagues around? How drastic has the change been there?
I mean, for me, it was a special situation since I'm pretty close with the Chancellor, and I was included in groups where we discussed measures going way beyond foreign policy and my competences, you could say. But it changed everything, basically. I mean, it was the question of internal structure of the ministry. You had to take care of your collaborators, your cabinet, even dealing with issues of what happens if somebody on the government suddenly is tested positive. Does it mean that all the others have to go into lockdown or quarantine? How does public infrastructure function in such a situation? And I have to say, and there are good points to it. I mean, it might be, I don't want to sound cynical, but in every crisis there's something positive, and I believe that I would hope that most colleagues would have learned the lessons that not every trip is necessary. I'm a big fan of video conferences. Although I have to say, if they're limited to 5 to 6 people, what doesn't work are EU Council meetings via video. Doesn't work. Simply too many people, and it ends up everybody reading out the notes and no discussion whatsoever. So this kind of, you know, dynamics which we both know in the council just don't happen if you're in a video conference. And I'm very curious to see how the General Assembly will work in September if it's only done via video. I mean, then you have 190 plus speeches read one after the other, which might not be the most exciting TV program ever broadcasted. But I think, for instance, what I'm doing every second week, and that's something which is new, and I started it now during this crisis, and due to the lockdown, every second or third week, I have a small round of think tankers, like Toci, Ivan Krastev, and others, Stefan Lehne, and we have this video debate, Blue Sky, what are the effects of Corona in the long run on foreign policy, European policy, and these kind of formats are highly interesting, and I would like to keep them even once the lockdown is over. And another thing which was very interesting for me is neighborhood suddenly mattered. I believe we discussed it probably years ago. I was criticized quite some time ago because I said in the 21st century, neighborhood is not a concept anymore as important as in the past, because Austria has more in common as EU positions are concerned with you know, Copenhagen or the Helsinki. And suddenly I was talking every day by video or telephone with the neighbors, starting with the Italian foreign minister and the Swiss, the German, and then obviously the Czech, the Slovaks, and so on, because we had all the commuters, we had the goods which had to be transported across the borders, we had transit issues. And especially a country like Austria, where we depend on commuters from especially Eastern European partners, It was an economic matter of utmost importance for us. But it was interesting because I had the feeling everybody did the same. Everybody was talking to its neighbors, and suddenly geography became an issue, or became important again. Because if you have a pandemic, you talk to the next door neighbor, and not to the guy who is on the other side of the street. Obviously, we did that too. We had video conferences at least once a week, either all EU member states or larger groups. But the most important interaction took place with our direct neighbors. We have 8 neighbors. After Germany, Austria is the country with the highest number of neighbors. So there was a lot of talking.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the interesting things. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, one of the interesting things is actually you can bring that to the family level as well. I mean, you're a foreign minister. You've been traveling now most of your life. You've been in and out of meetings, flying around, and then suddenly you are with your neighbors and your family and your friends, sort of in close proximity and in close contact. And in many ways, it brings you back to basics and the things that matter are most important. One of the things I worry about as a former minister is sort of the camaraderie that you made reference to as well in the so-called physical meetings. So, you go into a General Affairs Council or Foreign Affairs Council meeting, it's like a big psychotherapy session. The doors close, you pat each other on the back and give high fives. Oh, did you see the problems I had at home? And you miss that a little bit. And I think you lose that also on Zoom and on video. How permanent do you think this change is? I mean, how much are you going to rationalize your own travel as foreign minister? Because by definition, you are a diplomat and a foreign minister, and that basically means contact with the outside world. I mean, are you going to be a hybrid foreign minister in the future?
I would love to, but I fear I won't, because I feel already among many colleagues that they're only waiting to step into a plane again. And we have to admit that, as you said, personal interaction between human beings is irreplaceable. You see the mimics, and I like the term of Zoom fatigue, because video conferences are actually tiring, because your brain wants to interact in a different way. I believe what I would like to do is at least continue these kind of regular sessions on video with the neighbors. Why not continue what we have been doing the last couple of weeks and switch on the video every third week? Even if we don't have anything on the agenda, it's always interesting to hear what my Czech colleague or my Slovak colleague or Slovenian colleague or Hungarian colleague have to say about what is keeping them busy for the time being. So these things I would like to continue, but my expectation is that most people would like to go back exactly to where they were before. And I fear that the conference tourism, as we experienced in the past, will take up again very quickly. Also, partly because it's necessary, but partly also because don't forget, it's an economic factor as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. By the way, this was an interesting one. I just lost connection for a second. I don't know if you saw it or if you noticed it, but I was gone for a while. And that usually, of course, you can lose concentration and the rest of it, but this was a technological problem. Now, one of the nice things I have found with this, if you can find a silver lining, is that during 1 week, I noticed I would have had to be in 8 different capitals around the world, 3 different continents for the meetings and the conferences, speeches, and the rest of it that I conducted. And this has sort of helped things a little bit. Now, out of the practical issues, can I sort of come back to the issue of how the EU dealt with it in the beginning versus how you think we can come out of this together? Of course, as always, you've done the spokesman role, so you know that people are going to start criticizing. But if I throw this out to you, in the Euro crisis, it took us about 4 years to put up the ESM. In the COVID crisis, it took us basically 4 weeks to get our act together. Were we quite fast this time around? And when I say we, I mean the EU, all of us.
I would tend to agree with you. I mean, the problem is the public perception is very different. The public perception had this view that the European Union was nowhere. In March, at the beginning, and I always defended it, saying, well, we always agreed, our member states always agreed since 1958 that a santé publique, public health, is a reason which is a national competence and gives you a possibility to opt out, basically, of the common market if you have serious issues of public health or public security. So it was clear from the beginning on that there's no real competence in Brussels. And I always said that in the way out of the crisis, especially economically speaking, Brussels will be back in business, and that proves to be right, because that's exactly what is happening now. And I have to say, the discussion about the recovery fund is, from my perspective, a completely normal discussion. There are two countries who made a first proposal. The Commission picked it up. A couple of states say it's not enough. A couple of others say it's too much, and we will find middle ground. We will find middle ground. So this debate about, and that's one point which I always underline here in Austrian media. Actually, the European Union has proven as a union of solidarity, because although the Commission was not present and we didn't have council meetings, it was so obvious that the EU member states considered each other different and had this idea that we have to work together. And yes, I take the call of my colleague from the neighboring state or another state. Yes, we will have a video conference. So there was this kind of sense, this is a group, a family, and even if there are many, members which are not so close to you, it's still a family, and you tend to show a minimum of degree of solidarity. That has proven psychologically to be absolutely the case. So even if the institutions as such were not so present, it was always EU ministers talking to each other.
Yeah.
So that's a feature that people sometimes forget, and I'm fully. There are a couple of things which I would like to bring in the debate in the future, because there are those who say this is now we have this conference of the future of the European Union starting, and I believe if we talk about the lessons learned of the pandemic, I would rather tend to say, let's not talk again about competencies on the West. Yes, we should, and we will. And you're laughing. Yes, we did so also in the past. But there are a couple of lessons learned, very precise lessons learned. For instance, one thing, how come, and that's something which the Commission could do perfectly well, we have a problem of comparability of data. What is an intensive care unit in Helsinki, in Austria, or Madrid? And how can we ensure that numbers, and we have done this here in Vienna, we try to compare the numbers of, for instance, Bavaria with Lombardia. And it's not possible because they have different, statistics, and they're not one-to-one comparable. This is something where we can say in future, and it doesn't need any new competence. We simply agree, we report to one unit, the Commission drafts a couple of criteria according to which, the data is collected. We have this with Eurostat, and which would make response a lot easier in the future. And other thing, for instance, I heard from companies here, and we're in the process in Austria to talk to entrepreneurs to find out what was their lessons learned. And I heard, for instance, from the energy companies that they had the problem because a couple of member states did not decrease the production of electricity during the Corona crisis, although industry needed less. So all the other member states and their grids had to cope with that. So all the other countries had additional costs because they had to cope with the energy produced in one or two member states because they simply refused to decrease the production. Here again, it would be easy to coordinate that and to have at least an exchange of information in Brussels. So I believe there are a couple of very precise lessons learned where member states, I believe, could easily agree to find common ground, because one thing is sure, this is not the last pandemic we will face.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and so your basic message is that instead of having this sort of focus on competencies, whether it's exclusive, shared, or national based, we should focus on the sort of coordination data points where we could improve this type of crisis management. Let me take it one step further and go to your sort of roaming ground, stomping ground, in other words, foreign policy and geopolitical implications of the crisis. And I mean, in the public debate, you see very much these sort of three power centers dealing with it. One of them is obviously China, one is the United States, and one is Europe. What's your feeling on how these three big entities have coped with the situation? How will Europe come out of this?
A broad question. Very differently. The first thing that would come into my mind is the competition of narrative we are witnessing now. The Chinese are coming out and are the country who first come out of the crisis, who is helping all the rest. We have a very aggressive, you could say, narrative partly coming out of the US. We have now added to it the George Floyd issues and manifestations all over Europe, and I'm constantly asked every day by media on the reaction to that. So there are many different layers which are interlinked and mixed. Honestly, most people I believe would not count Europe among the three. They would say there's US and there's China. And what happened now is this crisis, and I deeply believe in that. Corona hasn't created anything new, but it has increased tendencies which were already existent. So the tensions, for instance, between US and China. Also now, we have an election coming up in the US, so this is another factor which pays into that. Europe as such, I would say in an international sphere, was I would say March, beginning of April, not so present. And then we began with what I would call the mask diplomacy. For instance, as Austrian foreign minister, I called all the Western Balkan states, I called the colleagues in Ukraine, Moldova, and others, offering them to take in intensive care patients, offering them aid packages. And we had about 3 or 4 waves of aid packages we have sent to others, because we were lucky enough from end of March on that we had too much, actually. We had been so careful and so eager to get the equipment to Austria that at the end we didn't need it all. But I believe that what we have to observe very closely, and that's something which is worrying me, is the growing tensions between China and US. And for a country, I think it's the same for Finland and for us, we need a rules-based international order. We need multilateralism at the end of the day. Even if multilateralism was not present actually during the height of this crisis, and now you see a little bit of a tendency or increased tendency by the US to pull back from multilateral institutions, for instance, the World Health Organization, and the Chinese moving in. And this is not a development which we can see positively, because we need both of them. And we need a strong Western ally. And at the end of the day, it's the US which is our strongest Western ally.
Can I then sort of push a little bit on that and the question about, okay, if the two sort of power bases are the United States and China, and of course, if and when the United States is our ally and we share global values, universal values with them, how should we play in this? Is there a geopolitical game that we could get involved in here a little bit with the current American administration and the Chinese? Because at some stage, I think a lot of people are going to make this into a black and white issue. You're either with us or against us. So how should Europe play this?
The thing is, that's interesting what you're saying, because are you with us or are you without us or against us? I believe that won't change whether you have Trump or Biden in the White House. This kind of thinking. And my point is, we should be very much aware in Europe that there is a community of values, a transatlantic community of values. And sometimes I'm a little bit astonished. You can always talk about it, you can always explain it, that Western public or European public reacts a lot more aggressively when things come out of the US than when they come out of China or Russia. Another interesting point, that Russia is nowhere in this debate for the time being. That's the footnote.
True.
But,
yeah.
But for instance, I don't know whether it would be the same for a member of the Finnish government, but if I was in February in Washington, I saw the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and also journalists asked me actually, what are you doing here? Why are you here? Why are you meeting these people? Why are you meeting this administration? They would never ask me the same question had I been in Moscow or Beijing. And this is something which is utterly, completely wrong, because we're still a community of values. Yes, the current president of the United States might be a challenge, might give us, a couple of headaches, but he is still the president of the United States, and it's a communion of values we have with them. And my reaction always is that's why we are so shocked to see the video of George Floyd, because it happened in the US. It happened in a country which is so similar to us, with checks and balances and independent judiciary, with a civil society which is probably a lot livelier and stronger than any civil society in Western Europe. So let's keep things in perspective. And I'd rather, and I believe things, and especially 75 years after the end of the Second World War, we should be aware of what the US has meant for Western Europe after the Second World War, starting from the Marshall Plan to the beginning of the European integration. Wouldn't have been possible with them, and it wouldn't have been possible against them. And this is still something where we sometimes have the feeling in the public eye in Europe, we tend to completely forget about this community we have with them. And we are staring too much to a certain degree to Beijing and Moscow. They are strategically important partners, and a country like Austria needs, strong partnerships with all of them. But you could say the values we share only with one of those.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that this sort of COVID crisis can strengthen our foreign policy? I mean, this was a question coming from Fabrizio Tassinari, who is our executive director at the School for Transnational Governance at the EUI. I mean, can it sort of change the scope and the depth of our foreign policy? And you can link this answer to, how do we deal with China, or how do we deal with the US together after COVID-19?
I wouldn't say a direct link between COVID-19 and strengthening of the CFSP. I would say, and we had recently a video conference organized by Madrid on the southern Mediterranean partners, especially Libya. And at the time, I had the feeling what we lack most in Brussels is honesty in the debates we're having. And as long as we cannot talk really frankly among us about what we actually want to do about China, what each and every member state has an intention to do, we will never find common ground in our policy. We have the 16+1 or 17+1, depending on your perspective, approach to the Belt and Road. Relationship with Russia is similar. Sometimes you have the feeling the US transatlantic relations are very much dominated by party politics, where the government comes from, so to say. So as long as you don't have an honest and open exchange in Brussels, or Libya is a case, that's why I mentioned it. Mm-hmm. How do you want Europe to have a common approach if we're not honest among each other and say actually where we really stand on these issues? It's probably easy for us because Austria has not so many vested interests in these things, and we're not part of Belt and Road. We haven't signed an MOU with China. We're never a colonial power outside Europe, so to say.
Don't worry, Alexander. I usually say that, in 2017, Finland celebrated 100 years of independence. I switched it around and no. 100 years ago, we gave Russia its independence, but people didn't believe me when I said.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I believe that is the most important thing, to have a clear exchange of views. But what I see, and that's a positive thing, with Josep Borrell, the council has become more political. And that is something we just see as a positive thing. And he is a true, former foreign minister, and you sense that. That's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on that. Then there's, of course, a lot of talk about this sort of newish concept of strategic autonomy or strategic sovereignty. And on the economic side, one could argue that geopolitics is not anymore only about security, it's much broader. And now, of course, if you look at the Commission's recovery package, it talked about open strategic autonomy. Where do you fall on this sort of scale? How do you see the importance of the concepts of strategic autonomy, or is it just, foreign policy wish-wash?
No, I believe it's important, and I believe what I see as an immediate consequence, or I would say as an immediate consequence of the Corona crisis, is what some have called the Yom Kippur effect. After the Yom Kippur War, you had the oil crisis, and all countries started to stockpile oil and gas, although it's very costly, to at least ensure a couple of months, half a year, 1 year of independence in case such a shock appears again. And I believe what we will see definitely is this Yom Kippur effect in the health system. The next crisis might concern syringes, and everybody needs 5 syringes a day, and suddenly we find out that they're all produced somewhere in Central or Southeastern Asia, and we're running out of syringes after 2 months. So I believe stockpiling in these forms and this thinking of, because we won't be able to change the production lines. You cannot force private companies to simply start in Finland, Sweden, Germany or Austria simply because the government wants to, unless you obviously start to renationalize companies. That is not our policy and wouldn't be wise, I believe. But so states are probably asked to think twice in what areas we might need products stockpiled somewhere, to have at least ensure an independence of 6 months, because that was a shock that we found out that 90% of all masks are produced, if I remember correctly, in Malaysia. That gloves are produced to 95% also somewhere in Southeast Asia. And the next time it might be an earthquake shutting down the Suez Canal, and things probably take 3 months longer to reach Europe. It might be another catastrophe striking us all. And I believe that is one part of the thinking we have to start. And the other thing is what we already started a couple of years ago is what the FDI strategy, foreign direct investment, to see exactly. And I believe now we have to get better. We started during our EU presidents in 2018 as well. We had this debate, and it was the French under President Macron who actually kick-started it. We have a debate even going on in Austria, and it's a very tricky issue with other companies which are of strategic importance, although they're in private hands. Are there political or legal means to ensure that these stay in Europe or stay at least, on national even? And so this is a thinking which is actually not very easily put together or with the globalization. I believe globalization will become a lot more regional in the coming years, because the pandemic has been a shock for many companies, for many states, as far as dependency and production lines are concerned.
Yeah, I think the sort of value chains are going to be one of the key issues that we're dealing with. Before I post my next question, we have roughly 5 to 10 minutes left. I want to invite our live audience from China, from Spain, from India, from Indonesia, and around the world that I'm seeing here to pose a couple of questions as well. Now, interesting enough, Finland had a stockpile of stuff. It's called huoltovarmuus, so basically our service system. But it was, and for rather obvious reasons. We have a rather big neighbor to the east, which is not always very predictable in its actions. So therefore, we've had certain stockpiles. But what was then found out very quickly was that whoops, these stockpiles of masks were actually a little bit old and decrepit. So something had to be done, and there was this element of hoarding in it all. Now, if we start looking a little bit forward and going perhaps more towards the sort of economic aspects of things, and I know that no one has the crystal ball, but in your thinking in government in Austria and with the Chancellor and Finance Minister, when do you see things starting to ease up, and how do you compare this to the euro and the financial crisis in a broad kind of a sense?
That's a very interesting, good question, because I believe that we always, there's one thing which is very common to all of us, we forget extremely quickly. And if we talk to politicians or to journalists, they say, listen guys, look at your headlines you had in 2008 and 2009, and you predicted the meltdown of the European banking system, especially in Austria, since we were so exposed to Eastern European banks and so on. And nothing proved true actually in the end of the day. I'm pretty optimistic. I mean, the predictions are grim, and Austria is a country absolutely dependent on exports. So even if we have a development within Austria, and we are easing now, our measures, we are dependent of others. And 6 out of 10 euros Austria gains, economically speaking, we gain through export. So we are dependent on the German automobile industry. We are dependent on others. So if they fare badly, it will have huge repercussions. And we have, for the time being in Austria, the highest unemployment rate we ever, I mean, we were a very lucky country. Austria had an extremely low unemployment rate the last couple of years. And this is, politically speaking, a certain shock, because we haven't experienced that actually since the 60s, what we're living through now, as far as numbers are concerned, or the 70s. So it might be really a game changer as far as government policies are concerned. We might go back a little bit to the textbooks we had in the 90s, to a certain degree, or 80s rather. Meaning government spending. We in Austria have put together a package of 30. We were facing or aiming for a zero deficit budget this year, and now we have put together a package of 38 billion euros just for commerce and one people enterprises and so on. And it doesn't stop there. We will end up probably with 50 billion at the end of the day if we put everything together. So it is, as the Chancellor said, to a certain degree, whatever it takes, we will do whatever it takes to come out of this, and we will put up the funds and the spending schemes and all these things. So, and I presume most countries have done the same. So economically speaking, we will sense that even in years to come, in as far as Maastricht criteria are concerned. But definitely, because
yeah, I think your assessment is absolutely correct, and we can basically throw out all the good old textbooks on financial markets and macroeconomics and also the growth and stability pact. I'm sure Romano Prodi is right now sitting and sort of smiling when he the stability and growth pact is stupid. Remember that in the beginning of 2000s. Things change. I have two questions for you here, Alexander, from the audience. The first one is from George Vinke. He says or asks, but will stockpiling be enough? Why not some strategic autonomy in key products and services EU-wide? So could we stockpile together is the first question.
I mean, good question. Austria has one of the last companies in Europe, as far as I remember correctly, where actually pills are produced. Because it's one thing to have the formula, but we have in Western Austria a company which are actually still pressing the pills together. And all the others are somewhere in central China, Vietnam, Laos, or whatever. Now, there are only two ways in an open economy. Either you buy the company as a state, or you buy at least a 50 plus one share to make sure it stays. You create tax incentives, which are difficult in a common market, state aid and the rest, or you stockpile. And I presume that we will not embark as Europe in policies which are in violation of basics such as state aid and competition law. And I don't believe that most national governments are ready to embark now on a nationalization of industries. Where would you stop? Today it would be health business. Tomorrow it might be energy, it might be telecom, 5G as issue. It might be, where do you stop? And I don't believe this is not the policy we will adopt in Austria, at least.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Hey, Alexander, I don't want to take more of your time and abuse your time. It's been a wonderful 40-minute conversation. It's always fun for me sitting on the academic side of the fence to listen to a foreign minister who has two things going for him. One is substance, because you've been there, you've done it all over the years, and the other one is communication skills. And I think in order for us to get out of this crisis, we will need both of those. So I would like to thank you deeply for joining me in this first FlorenceLive interview conversation. I hope our audience enjoyed it as well, and I wish you all the best in the months and years to come when you're trying to sort out COVID there. And let me tell you also that responsibility is a big and important. Freedom is a lot of fun as well. See you on this side of the fence one day. Really lovely to see you, Alexander, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for the invite, and I hope to see you very soon in Vienna in person. And anytime, I love these kind of exchanges. So thanks for the invite.
Thanks a lot. I'll see you soon. Take care, and thank you very much to our audience. And just a reminder that we will be back here again on the 15th of June, the 22nd of June, and the 24th. We'll be discussing migration. On Africa, we'll have Mo Ibrahim and Jutta Urpilainen. And on trade, we'll have Cecilia Malmström. And on the EIB side, we'll have Werner Hoyer. A lot of interesting people coming up. So thanks for joining us, and all the best, and have a nice evening. Bye, Alexander.